What if your mother never held you? A psychologist at the University of Wisconsin built a mother out of wire mesh and a wooden head and gave it to a newborn monkey. He built a second mother, same frame, same wooden head. But this one was wrapped in soft terry cloth and heated from the inside. Then he watched to see which one the infant would choose. The wire mother had the milk. The cloth mother had nothing. The infant spent 18 hours a day clinging to the cloth mother. It went to the wire mother only long enough to feed, then ran back. When something frightened it, a loud noise, an unfamiliar object, it didn't run toward food. This is the Harlow wire mother experiment. Harry Harlow didn't set out to study love. He set out to learn about learning. Fresh out of Stanford with a new PhD, he took a job at the University of Wisconsin and built a primate lab from scratch. Bought a vacant building near campus, renovated it himself, and filled it with rhesus monkeys. For the first 2 decades of his career, he was interested in one thing: how do monkeys learn to learn? Not how they acquire specific skills, but how they develop the cognitive strategy of problem solving itself. He was good at it, productive, respected, completely uninterested in anything as unscientific as emotion. In the mid-1950s, something happened in his nursery that he hadn't planned for. Harlow had begun separating infant monkeys from their mothers at birth for hygiene reasons. Isolated infants were healthier, easier to monitor, simpler to study. He kept them in individual wire cages with gauze diapers on the floor. And he noticed something he couldn't explain. The infants were becoming desperately attached to the diapers. Not interested in them, attached. When researchers tried to remove them for cleaning, the infants screamed and fought. When the diapers were gone, a cloth diaper had no warmth, no smell, no movement. By every existing theory of attachment, there was no reason an infant should care about it at all. The dominant theory at the time had a name: cupboard love. Infants attach to whoever feeds them. A mother is loved because a mother provides milk, warmth, touch, comfort, everything downstream of food. It was the consensus. It had been the consensus for decades. Harlow looked at his diapers and at the screaming infant monkeys and thought, something is wrong with that theory. He built a test. 2 surrogate mothers. He gave half the infant's milk from the wire mother and the other half milk from the cloth mother. If cupboard love was right, each group should bond to whichever one fed them. If something else was driving attachment, they'd all end up in the same place regardless of who had the bottle. He already suspected what he'd find. He ran it anyway because suspicion isn't evidence. What he didn't know yet was that the answer would ruin some people's lives. John Watson was the most influential parenting authority in America, who told parents to never to hug their children, never to let them sit in their lap, and to shake hands with them in the morning instead. Pediatricians recommended it, and parents who genuinely wanted to show care to their children weren't allowed to. But we'll touch on that later. Whether the milk came from the wire mother or the cloth mother made no difference. The infants fed by the wire mother went to her only long enough to eat, then immediately returned to cling to cloth. By 3 weeks of age, both groups were spending between 17 and 18 hours a day with the cloth mother. Wire got 1 hour, just enough time to feed. Then Harlow placed a frightening object in the cage, a mechanical spider. The infants fed by the wire mother, the ones who had received every calorie of their lives from the wire mother, did not run to her. They ran to cloth. Every time. They pressed themselves against the terry cloth and gradually calmed. Put the cloth mother in an unfamiliar room, and the infant explored. Remove her, and the same infant huddled in a corner, rocking, sucking its thumb. The infants had told him something the theory hadn't. They weren't attaching to food. They were attaching to warmth, to texture, to the physical sensation of being held. Harlow called it contact comfort. And contact comfort meant the most trusted parenting advice in America had been pointing in exactly the wrong direction for 30 years. On August 31st, 1958, Harlow stood in front of the American Psychological Association in Washington, D.C., and delivered his presidential address. He showed them photographs of the wire mother and the cloth mother, of infants clinging to terry cloth while the bottle sat empty on the other side of the cage. The APA audience had built careers on the theory he had just dismantled. They gave him a standing ovation. The cloth mother result proved something about infants. What came next proved something about what happens to them when the cloth mother isn't there. The infants who had been raised on cloth surrogates grew up. They had been comforted. By the behavioral standard of the time, their early needs had been met. But when Harlow introduced them to other monkeys, real monkeys, social monkeys, animals with the full behavioral complexity of their species, the surrogate-raised monkeys didn't know what to do. They couldn't play normally. They were either withdrawn or aggressive, sometimes both in the same interaction. They couldn't mate. When researchers brought unfamiliar monkeys into the lab, the cloth mother-raised animals crouched in corners or attacked without warning. Harlow had assumed the cloth mother was the solution. A real mother isn't just warmth and texture. She moves. She responds. She rejects sometimes and accepts other times. She plays and stops playing. She is a dynamic, unpredictable social partner. And through thousands of those tiny interactions in the first months of life, an infant learns the basic grammar of how to be with another creature. The cloth mother provided comfort. She couldn't provide that. She always felt the same. She never responded. The isolated animals who had been raised on cloth surrogates were, in the deepest sense, socially illiterate. Then Harlow pushed further. He wanted to know what happened to the monkeys that had nothing, not even cloth. He built vertical chambers he called pits of despair. Newborn monkeys were placed inside and left in darkness and silence for up to a year, with only food and water supplied mechanically. When they were removed, they huddled, they rocked, they stared at nothing. They showed every behavioral marker of severe clinical depression. And Harlow knew what that looked like because by the late 1960s, he had been hospitalized for a major depressive disorder himself. He described depression as a life within a wall of steel. He built the pits to study what he was living. The pit monkeys never recovered. The motherless monkeys grew into adulthood. Harlow wanted to know if the damage traveled, whether a monkey that had never been held could hold her own infant. The isolated females couldn't mate naturally. Harlow used a restraining device to impregnate them. He named the device something we're not allowed to say on this channel. When the infants were born, the motherless mothers ignored them. Some pushed them away when they tried to nurse. Some attacked them. A number subjected their own newborns to sustained physical harm. And yet, and this is the detail that stopped researchers cold, the infants kept trying. They crawled back. They attempted contact again and again, even after being hurt, even after being rejected, even after being attacked. The drive to attach was stronger than the experience of harm. What Harlow found in those cages, an infant returning to an abusive caregiver, because the need for attachment is more powerful than the instinct to avoid pain, came one of the foundational explanations for why abused children so frequently remain attached to the people hurting them. The bond doesn't form because the relationship is safe. It forms because the need is acute and the person in front of you is the only one available. Remember John Watson, the guy that told parents to never hug their children? Well, this is what he had to say, that the attachment bond followed feeding, that the holding, the warmth, the physical responsiveness of a caregiver was a nice extra, not an actual requirement. Here is what Harlow found, that the attachment bond forms through contact. Without it, an infant develops normally in one narrow sense. It survives, feeds, it grows, and is catastrophically damaged in every other sense. The damage passes forward, that the motherless mother produces the conditions for another motherless child. And here is what Watson's own life showed. He raised 4 children on his own philosophy. He kept his distance. He shook hands instead of hugging. 3 of his 4 children attempted suicide as adults. 1 succeeded. Watson never connected it. He died in 1958, the same year Harlow stood in front of the APA and proved him wrong. Harlow's student Stephen Suomi spent years trying to undo the damage in the isolated monkeys. He paired them with younger, healthy animals, therapist monkeys, Suomi called them. Within weeks, the isolated monkeys' rocking and self-clutching began to decrease. Within 6 months, some of them were indistinguishable from animals who had never been isolated. Not all of them, but enough to prove that what early deprivation had taken could sometimes be partially restored. Not by recreating infancy, but by creating a new kind of contact. Harlow wrote to a colleague about those results in 1974. He said, "Since I had stated for a long time that rehabilitation of these monkeys was impossible, I was both chastened and educated. It drew the line between what a body needs to survive and what a person needs to become." For 30 years before Harlow, an entire field of experts, backed by science, published in best-selling books, followed by hospitals and parents and pediatricians, every time someone held a baby for longer than they thought they were supposed to, and then stopped because an expert told them not to, they were living inside that mistake.